Hi there, and welcome to episode 74 of B2B SaaS Marketing Snacks. I'm Brian Graff, I'm the CEO of Kalungi, and I'm back with Kalungi's co-founder, Stijn Hendricks, who's a serial SaaS marketing executive and ex-Microsoft product marketing leader. Today, we're tackling a challenge that keeps many early-stage founders up at night. How do you actually get traction with a minimum viable product? Let's face it, building the product is just the beginning. You've probably heard people say, just turn on marketing and revenue will flow. Well, sometimes, and with the right preparation, it can be that simple, but often it isn't. We're diving into finding your true ICP, your ideal customer profile, and why it's absolutely crucial before you can hit the gas on growth. We'll explore why some minimum viable products catch fire immediately, while others struggle to gain traction, even with solid execution. And we'll talk through what the most important questions are that you need to answer in the market to gain that traction. Let's get into it. All right, Stijn, thank you so much for joining me again. I think today's topic is how to get traction from a marketing perspective with an MVP product. And I think a lot of it hinges on finding the right ICP, but I think there's a few different ways that we can attack it. I think just to give a little bit of background from my train of thought here is obviously you wrote the book T2D3 and you have that baseball analogy on before you can become a unicorn, you have to first get to minimum viable product, and then you have to reach product market fit, and then you can start to scale from there. And particularly, you cannot cut corners. But many executives that I will talk to when they come in our doors will say something to the effect of, hey, so we built the product and we got a little funding, so now we're ready to turn on marketing and get the revenue dollars flown in the door, right? Which is true and accurate, but often it's not, depending on where the product is, it's not that simple. If the product is set up really well and you built the product with one true ICP in mind and you solved the problem really, really well, then yes, you can turn on the marketing faucet and dollars will start pouring in. But often from my perspective, where you start out when you're building a product is not where you will finish, right? So you start building a product that solves a particular problem that you came up with, but along the way you talk with people, you explore different markets, right? And what ends up really hitting for your company or that product is not what you started building for at all, right? And it becomes much greater because there was just something that you hadn't even thought of. And in those scenarios, right, it does require a bit more from marketing and product marketing in order to really get the product to catch. That's kind of my background on it. And I do want to just pick your brain basically on this kind of phase, this key phase in a product's lifestyle, right? It's kind of post MVP, you're ready to go to market and maybe you've had a little bit of traction with a few different types of markets, but you don't have really strong inroads anywhere and you might have funding, but you need to start showing growth. So I guess maybe I'll start with, when you're in a situation like that, what strategies do you typically prioritize? Like what's your main priority in order to move the product forward and move it towards product market fit?
Yeah, I think it's a really important step to confirm the inside voices of a founder, of an innovator, someone who came up with an idea and they think it's a great idea and they're now convinced that the market loves it, to just validate that, right? That's where the word, the V, viable, comes from, right? Minimum viable product. So how do you test for viability, right? And how you make sure that there's not your opinion repackaged, but actually an honest test, right? An honest kind of market evaluation. So you're kind of testing the value proposition, right? Is there actual value in my proposition? What's the real value? And there are many ways to do that, but common terms include things like what's the job to be done, right? Do we understand how the value gets created by doing this and this and that? That's what my solution actually does. And which then also often immediately answers the question, what pain is there that we're solving for, right? Is my solution an aspirin versus a vitamin, right? Is it solving a real need, a real pain point, or is it solving for maybe a desire or a nice to have, which both can be a viable business, by the way, but it's good to kind of be able to differentiate. And that's really answering the question, what's it for, right? When you get to product market fit, you really have answered both questions, like what's it for and who's it for. Now I have confirmed not only what the product is, the value proposition, but also what part of the market it fits best with, right? That's PMF, product market fit. That's the next step. But in MVP, you're really focused on that initial, the product part, right? What's the value of my value proposition? What pain does it solve? What's the job to be done? What's it for? And ultimately also, is it useful, right? Is it useful as in, it's another way of thinking about is there value, right? And I think you start also to explore a little bit what the ICP, the ideal customer profile, could look like, right? You get some of that feedback during an MVP. But even if you test the value prop with an audience that's a little different from what ends up maybe becoming your ICP in the future, that's okay. You can still get your MVP done. You could kind of answer the question, this is at least valuable for someone, for a small part of the market, right? Because when you get more to product market fit, you're also going to answer the question, is it usable? Not only useful, but also usable. And that you can only do it if you actually know what audience you're specifically testing. So that's kind of my way of thinking about MVP, Brian.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. I guess we're almost taking a step back and you're almost removing ICP from the equation for a second, right? In terms of, in that you're really just going out into the market with what you think is the most valuable messaging and positioning and value that your product brings, and then you're letting the market kind of dictate who's it for you. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think when we do our strategy workshop, that I've done many times as well, but when I was still with Kalungi and your team does that, you kind of have these 3 points where you can start, right? It's either you start with what should our growth strategy be for this year, the T2, D3 growth strategy, the combination of multiplying your demand gen, capabilities, right? Diversifying demand gen, improving conversion rate and speed, improving deal size, right? Reducing churn, all these things that go into T2, D3 growth. You do that for companies that have really reached product market fit because they will know both what their value prop is, the positioning, and they will know the ICP, right? If they don't know those two correctly yet, you're still getting, how do we get to product market fit, right? How do we confirm the ICP? And then the step before that is, how do you confirm the positioning? So you kind of, depending on where you are, you refer to the baseball triangle, right? Are you still getting to MVP, or you between MVP and PMF, or you between PMF and getting to high scale growth? You kind of start with one of these 3 questions. If you're not at MVP yet, you still want to answer the question, what's it for? If you've answered that, you're at MVP, you know to go to product market fit, you're now going to answer the question, who's it for, in addition to what's it for? And then once you've done that, you can start answering the question, how do we grow exponentially now that we know who's it for and what's it for? So that's kind of how the framework works.
Let's use that analogy. So you have a company that has rounded first base, right? They've cleared minimum viable product and they are searching for product market fit. They're trying to answer who's it for. Talk to me through, I guess, how you have that strategic conversation, either how you implement it or how you have that strategic conversation with executives in terms of how to establish that, right? We can always go in and interview customers and interview prospects, but I think that there's kind of a balance that needs to be reached with the resources that marketing has, obviously, but with how many different markets you test and how deeply you test them to get some results, right? And some feedback as quickly as you can, right? So that you can really know where to double down and where to cut bait, right? After you're a certain period of time.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer your question in exactly the way you're asking it, but I do believe you have to be very clear on what questions are you trying to get answers for, right? And not try to test too many things at the same time. But part of testing the value prop would also be testing the core of what you're trying to do and not trying to maybe test 20,000 different features, but get a relatively crisp understanding of what the core of the value prop is by confirming the 4 or 5 core things it does, right? And doing that with a part of the market that is representative of people, companies, prospects that could get value out of your solution is good enough at MVP level. I don't know if it has to be, always the specific industry, or you have to start testing that. That's kind of more figuring out the ICP, which you will do a little bit later. Mm-hmm. Just getting people who you think have the problem that you're trying to solve for and letting them tell you, hey, this is what the product is still missing. These are the capabilities that I really like. These are the things that are less relevant for me. This is what make it, even better. I think that's what you want to get to.
Yeah, you're almost focusing more on jobs to be done and psychographics than firmographics.
And you're recruiting your early audience, I guess, mostly from people who tend to be early adopters, innovators, who like to kind of help you finish the product, who don't mind it being incomplete, right? They almost take pride in that. They might never buy it, right? That's, by the way, part of the problem of the crossing the chasm model from Jeffrey Moore is that when you're getting to MVP, the people that help get you there are not necessarily economic buyers, right? They might not be the people who will give you a certain amount of dollars to solve this problem. They maybe just vote with their time. They give you their time because they're excited about you solving for this problem. They care, right? Yeah. And so they're not necessarily the best references later on, although you still want to have them as also, because you need a couple of references, you need a couple of early testimonials. But they're not necessarily the best for economic references, right? That's actually why the chasm exists, right? It's hard to get over that, to get from people who are really excited about your product because they were partly helping you build it, versus people who love it because it helps them reach their economic goals, right? Different set of audience.
Yeah, the audience that gets you to the chasm will not be the one that gets you across it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So in this, I guess one other, as you're talking through this, right, it makes a lot of sense, and we need to be, again, we're all solving who's it for, and literally who's it for, and right, not necessarily the type of company that it's for. In this scenario, right, I think it's important to note that you probably shouldn't be focused on ad spend efficiency yet, right? Like we're trying to solve this who's it for problem, and we're not going to do it by hyper focusing on, again, things like ad spend efficiency, or even, a click-through rate, kind of. But what I'm trying to say is, like, you're more trying to answer a question, right, than you are trying to prove out like really efficient ad spend or something like that, right? Do you see it that way, or is it different in your mind?
Yeah, it's really what is the core of what I'm trying to do here, right? And is that worth doing? And also, it helps you get ready for when you do invest more time in finishing it, that you're not building out the wrong thing, right? You're focused on the capabilities that seem to have resonated, and you can focus whatever features you invest in, and you can focus the next, like the product market fit stage, or to go after the right part of the market, etc.
That is a great point, right? And we've seen this where it doesn't matter how good the strategy is, or how good the execution is, or how good the channels are, right? But if the core questions of who's it for, what's it for, are not answered correctly, right, none of the rest will struggle. And we have seen clients who we've come in, they've been at or around product market fit, right? And according to them, and we've gone in against their ICP and pushed everything against it, right? And it just hasn't worked. And then we've seen that we've pivoted to a different ICP, and it actually has, with the same, right, similar tactics, similar effort. And so it is really important to answer those questions. But you brought up investment in what you just said, and that was actually going to be my next question. So thank you for the segue. How do you look at investment at this phase in a company's journey for marketing, right? Like you probably can't, unless you're funded, can't spend a ton of money to answer these questions, but you also can't starve the marketing muscle, right? So that you do answer these questions and can double down in the right areas. How do you typically think about that with the companies that you work with?
Yeah, I think in the current world of constant communication, everybody being very very hard to get a hold of. The days of doing market research with things like surveys, etc. Those are really, it's hard to do that, right? So, and that's why it's also the M. We've talked about viable product, but the M is minimal, right? So, the best way of thinking about the investment is that it should be the individual who's really behind the company, or the individuals, if you're with a couple of partners, spending a lot of real quality time with a small group of people. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And it's really because you do it so focused that you get results relatively quickly. You really can test and iterate, right? That's very important. You will, by definition, find things that either prove, but also some that will disprove your assumptions, and that you'll then learn from them. You'll change your plan, and that shouldn't cost a lot of money. So I think if you're really an MVP, it's not the time to talk about investing like capital. It's about investing your time, and especially the people who are the thought leaders behind the company, the founders, etc., spending time themselves talking with the people they're asking to use the product, right? To get really immediate feedback, not have things getting lost in translation. I think that's really important. And what you really want to look for is what's called engaged advocates, right? People who are not only saying it's a great idea, but they're voting with their time by using it, right? Engaging with it. Either engaging it by using it to do the thing that it's supposed to do, or engaging with it by telling you that it's not complete, right? Or it should be a little bit different.
Right.
And because that means they care about the problem, right? And they may help you finish the product. And the advocacy part, I think that's how you kind of test whether they really get value. It doesn't mean they have to become immediate, like talking to the whole world about how great your product is, but kind of be a positive advocate to whoever else they talk about your solution, right? And say, yeah, this could work. It seems there's a problem that's important to solve for, and these guys seem to be on the right track, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think once MVP has been achieved, right, you basically have, again, you have the what's it for, and you have some inclination of who's it for, right? You've seen some traction. You've had those conversations with beta users in a few different areas. And then I would say that it's probably marketing and sales' job to go start to explore those areas at a little bit more scale, right? But of course, you can't, or I don't think you can. Maybe if you're fully funded, you can, but you can't expect a fully fledged go-to-market, right, against each one, because it would just be wasteful. But you can and should run hyper-specific tests that are iterative, right, to your point. And this is why I went back on what I was saying about ad spend efficiency, right? Not spend efficiency, but you should be looking very closely at, the performance of everything that you're putting out there with each messaging point and with each target audience, right? Because that's in a world where it's harder to talk with everyone, but there's more analytics than ever, right? That's kind of your shortcut to getting those insights. Have you ever had to have a conversation with an executive that wants to move super fast, right? They're at MVP and they feel really bullish about their product and they're ready for revenue, right? But you're taking a look and you're seeing that the who's it for has not been answered, for example. Yeah, what advice do you have for them, or how would you handle that conversation?
I think being comfortable asking the question, who's it for, what's it for, and following up with the why and the how ladder is a good format. So you ask, so who's it for, right? And then you ask why. Why being a form of why would they care, right? Why is that important for them? And you do a couple of whys, right? Until you get to, because they like to solve world hunger, then you probably have gotten to the ultimate. And then you also do a little bit of how laddering. You step down the ladder. You say, hey, and how is it that you think your solution will do this that's going to be unique, that's special? Right, and that's, I think, a good way to just do some litmus testing on whether the founder or the person driving the MVP has thought through it enough.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that does get to, the core. It is just that simple, the core of who's it for, what's it for, that then really scales. And if those answers are compelling enough and you can validate those with the customers that you talk with and the market that you go into, then yeah, it is probably time to double down and start to pour more gas on the fire. Okay, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you to Adriano Valerio for producing this episode and the Kalungi team for helping us make this whole thing work. And of course, you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, all the links we mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. And if you want to submit or vote on a question you'd like us to answer, you can do that at kalungi.com/podcast. Every time we record, we take one of the top 3 topics and jam on it. Thanks again.